So yes, I'm going to talk about NHS requirements for AI in radiology. And just to start, I thought I'd have some disclaimers. I'm not a radiologist. I've never been a radiologist, and I'm very unlikely to ever be a radiologist. I've never worked for the NHS, so we're off to a good start. But I do have experience developing technology and AI-related products and delivering them into a clinical environment, which is obviously regulated and comes with certain challenges. So there's a well kind of used quote from Jeff Hinton, who recently received the Turing Prize, that it's quite obvious we should stop training radiologists. And you know, sort of going back to my childhood, he had this image of they're the coyote that's run off the cliff but hasn't looked down yet, so they don't know what's ahead. Personally, I think this kind of points to a lack of understanding of what radiology is, what they do. It overestimates the power of AI, at least in the sort of near to medium term, and also completely ignores the challenges that Gary mentioned earlier about integrating new technology into that clinical environment. And it's kind of nice example of this Gartner hype cycle where there'll be some people sitting on this peak of inflated expectations, but realistically they're just sliding down towards the trough of disillusionment at the moment, with the hope to rise. But a better quote is this one, and it's not that it will replace, but radiologists that use AI will replace those that don't. So I thought I'd start by looking at what radiologist does. And I thought this was quite nice because it highlights in the bottom left that radiologists don't spend most of their time reading and interpreting images and coming up with diagnostic conclusions. So what do they do? There's this whole process from when a patient is first referred to them and they need to determine, actually, is this imaging test sensible? What should the protocol be? All the way through to acquisition, reading the image, reporting and communicating that back. And a lot of AI is focused on this kind of perception reasoning part, but as I'm going to explain, I think there's opportunities throughout that pathway which will probably have more benefit in the sort of immediate term. So yeah, so if you look in the literature, if you kind of Google AI research for radiology, almost everything is around interpreting images. But there are lots of barriers to that. One is validation of AI algorithms. There was a study that was published recently from South Korea which showed that only 6% of AI radiology papers published in over about a 9-month period were validated on external data sets. So that obviously points to a huge issue with overfitting and overtraining. There's translation, reimbursement, and regulation issues that have already been discussed. Getting them into the clinic. Issues around liability. If an AI system makes a mistake, which it inevitably will do, who gets sued? You know, it might be slightly less of a problem in the UK, but in the US, you know, there's a whole industry around figuring out the right person to sue. And then regulation, as we talked about earlier. And then also, radiologists are really good at that bit. You know, that's what they've trained for. That's what humans are great at. That's what human brains are great at, this visual perception task, linking disparate sources of data to come up with a diagnosis. But with all that, we know that we need to improve throughput in these pathways. The rate of imaging coming through radiology departments is vastly outstripping the increase in manpower in these departments. So something does need to be done. So, you know, we talked earlier about the radiology workflow, and you know, over the next 10 minutes, I'll give you some examples of AI and how it's been applied to all of them. But I'll also mix in some examples from our own experience at Perspectum, where we run an imaging service ourselves. It's a very focused, slimmed-down version of an imaging service, but we have some of the same challenges. And we've had some of those same requirements put on us to scale, to improve our efficiency. So we've used AI technology, and I'll give some examples. Just quickly, our imaging service, we basically will take an MRI scan from a clinical site. They'll upload it to our core lab, our central reading service. We'll process it, and we'll send back a report to the radiologist or the referring physician with kind of quantitative characteristics of liver health. So going back to the first step, protocol recommendation. So this was a nice study that was published last year. And this used convolutional neural networks, which come up a lot. They're the kind of hammer that is used in AI in general to help radiologists select the right protocol. So this was trained on a large number of cases. And what they did is they used this network to take in the information from the electronic health record and make recommendations about the right musculoskeletal protocol for your MR acquisition. They reported high accuracy, but it's a nice example of these kind of technologies being used not for image processing. Moving on to, well, I was trying to find examples of patient scheduling, but despite hours on Google, I couldn't come up with anything. But I did find one on physician scheduling. And this was a company called Lightning Bolt that was acquired by Perfect Serve. And what they use is another kind of artificial intelligence, this combinatorial optimization, to help schedule physicians in a hospital administration department, effectively. But they take into account regular meetings, physician preferences, issues with on-call, recovery time after overnight shifts, etc. And what they do is it tries innumerable combinations to try and find the best fit for scheduling when people are on shift. And its implementation in a big US health system resulted in significant savings because of this more optimal use of resource. And I found lots of places mentioning that it could be used or was being used for patient scheduling to identify, say, patients that tend to be no-shows. So where can you put them in that schedule so they have minimal disruption to the rest of the pathway? But I couldn't find any concrete examples, so there could be an opportunity there. Then image acquisition and reconstruction. So this is when we first start to use it for imaging. And there's quite a lot of examples of where AI has been used in reconstruction. MR is a good example. Issues with MR, the acquisition times can be quite long, especially compared to CT. And reconstruction can take time. So there have been a number of different technologies developed, like parallel imaging and compressed sensing, to try and improve this. And the application of convolutional neural networks, again, has been an evolution on that to try and work out, if I undersample my data, so I don't acquire as much data as I perhaps could, can I still reconstruct an image that looks like it was reconstructed from a fully sampled data set? So they use a UNet, which is a kind of common convolutional neural network platform, to train the relationship or the mapping between the undersampled data and the fully reconstructed image. And once they've learned that kind of mapping, they put new undersampled data in, and the images that come out look pretty good. So you've acquired your patient, you've reconstructed the data, now you have to do worklist prioritization. So this is, when should a radiologist read it? Should they just read them as they come off the scanner, or is there something smarter that can be done? And one of the first examples I saw around this was a little while ago, and this was a US teleradiology company called VRAD. They announced that they'd trialed using deep learning to identify or screen brain CTs as they come into their centers to see if there was any evidence of a bleed. And if there was, those scans would get prioritized to the top of the list, so they get read faster by a radiologist. And I thought this was a really nice way of using it, because you mitigate a lot of the risk, because the worst case is you miss it and it just gets read in normal time. Or the worst case is you're completely wrong in your prediction, and actually everyone with bleeds get brought to the bottom of the list. But that's quite unlikely, hopefully. But the thing is you're just improving it. You're getting it read still by an expert, but just earlier and faster. Although they plan to productize this, I've not seen anything come through. But researchers from another big health network, Geisinger, have recently published effectively the same idea. So they're using these neural networks to sit on the PACS effectively. When a brain CT is acquired, they'll check it. If there is evidence of a bleed, they'll bump it to the top of the list for a radiological interpretation. And then just last year, the FDA cleared an early stroke detection software from a company called Viz.ai, and that has a similar idea. It sits on the system, it scans through CT images of the brain as they come through, And if it suspects a bleed, it sends a text message to a neurovascular radiologist to say, take a look at this scan because it's come through, it's urgent, and these are time-critical decisions. So the faster that information is analysed, the better the outcome for the patient. So then just a couple of examples from what we see at Perspectum. So unfortunately, not all scans that we receive are of good quality. In an ideal world, everything that will come through will be perfect. We primarily just look at the liver, but as well as the sort of typical artifacts you see on the right, we also get things like the scan doesn't have a liver in it, so there's not a lot we can do to quantify. And usually this relied, similar to the previous example, of when it got through the chain to one of our trained analysts to identify that there are issues and then either determine, okay, does it need to be looked at by a physicist to see if it's quantifiable? Do we need to go back to site to rescan? But that always introduces delay in the pathway. So what we're moving to now is using AI techniques to identify image artifacts. And if there are artifacts, they can be looked at quicker to see, does it need to go back to the site, or should it go to a more experienced reader to determine whether we can do anything with that data. Post-processing. So this is a nice example, and this is one of the earliest FDA clearances for the use of AI in medical imaging with a company called Arteris. And what they did is they took away this really onerous task of having a highly skilled radiologist manually segmenting the ventricles and the major chambers in the heart, which for someone with the skills of a radiologist, they're effectively reducing them to colouring in, which is not the best use of their time or hospital resource. And they found that actually they can get segmentations far faster and free up this time for the cardiologist or the radiologist to actually operate at the top of their kind of skill set, which is making these diagnostic inferences. We also have had similar challenges in that when we interpret our data, it was a requirement that our operators were having to manually extract the liver from these images so we could generate representative quantitative values. Again, that's not the best use of human time, and a lot of this can be automated. So we benefited. We had this huge backlog of cases that had already been manually segmented, so that's perfect for this kind of AI deep learning approach. So we kind of pushed it into the machine, came out with an algorithm that generated these segmentation masks, and it allowed us to improve throughput of scans, but also, more importantly, remove inter-rater variability. If you get two people to segment a liver, they invariably will disagree. But if we can have the same system that segments livers in the same way every time, we can be consistent and we can massively reduce this source of variation. And then we can do it on scale, which is another thing. Sometimes individual examples, it's hard to grasp. It's nice you can segment a liver. But if you're doing thousands of these scans, that's when you really start to appreciate the time savings that come through and the consistency that we can generate. And then we can map it across multiparametric MRI to other sequences to quantify multiple characteristics. And then we can also expand to other organs. So we can segment out the liver, which is our primary focus, but the spleen's right next to it. It's useful to know where the two are. It helps segment them both better. And information we can derive from the spleen also has important prognostic value for some of the more serious consequences of liver disease, such as portal hypertension. And then we can go further within an organ. So this is an example from one of the products we're developing to aid surgical planning, where we're automatically segmenting the liver into the quino segments, which helps surgeons plan whether a resection is appropriate or not for that patient based on how healthy and how much volume would be left. And then, again, sub-organ things, I can't think of the word, like the biliary tree. So this is something we're looking at our second product, where we provide quantitation of the biliary diameter. And this takes in a traditional MRCP scan that's generally assessed qualitatively. We tidy up the image, so we enhance it, we remove noise, and then we build this parametric model so we can quantify biliary diameter and generate new objective biomarkers for for patient management. And then as I mentioned, image interpretation, we're still reliant on these manual experts, which is good in some cases, but as the demand on the service grows, we need to look at alternatives, look at where automation can add value. And this has really been tested by our involvement in the UK Biobank, where 100,000 volunteers are receiving our scans, and we have to process that data so we can do these kind of big population research studies like GWAS analysis. So we used to have someone who would manually sit and would process 100 cases a day, and we could get through that, but that's not, I don't think that was particularly healthy for that person. They were kind of locked in a room just doing the same thing day in, day out and slowly going mad. So we looked at ways of improving it. And what we can do is use this technology that we talked about earlier to segment out the liver, to identify regions where we're not happy about quantifying from, where there might be motion artifacts, issues with fitting of the kind of parameters from the MR data, and then extract quantification. And what we found is actually even a fully automated, no human in the loop gives, for big population studies, completely equivalent values within the variability of you'd see if you had multiple readers processing the same data. So then, moving on to diagnostic inference. So that's something that we don't do. We're not clinicians, but there are examples of where AI has been used in this setting. So this is an example where they've used machine learning techniques to extract new parameters from images that aren't necessarily easily human interpretable. So this used techniques to extract features related to the motion of the heart wall. And these features that were extracted were more prognostic than the traditional measures such as the right ventricular ejection fraction, which is, again, promising. It needs wider validation, but it's showing that there are certain complex patterns that humans will struggle to interpret that you can pull out with a machine. This is another example from a company called ScreenPoint, and this is a common area of the application of AI, and this is interpreting mammography, where there are certain issues with the volume of scans and the number of scans that people have to process. And what they found in the study that was recently published, where they compared their technique to 101 radiologists, and they found that on average, the two systems perform indistinguishably. They're effectively the same. There are expert radiologists that consistently outperform the technology, but on average, it did a good job. So something like this could be very valuable in a kind of second reader environment to kind of act as a backstop, potentially. And then diagnostic inference. So this was the first time that the FDA cleared a product for making a diagnosis without a clinician in the loop. This was looking at diabetic retinopathy. So this company, IDXDR, what they did is they take images of the retina, and they'll automatically identify them and look for pathologies. And if they find it, they'll report. And what they found from this is that it performs very well, equivalently to an ophthalmologist, and it allows primary care physicians to make that diagnosis without having to refer to an ophthalmologist, which is a big impact, and it means that like equivalent care can be received on a wider population. And that's just a few of the kind of AI-based radiology products that have been approved or cleared by the FDA in the last couple of years. There's definitely an increase on those. There's a really nice review that was published just early this year by Eric Topol in Nature Medicine. I think he's got a book out that's available soon. And then the final part in the chain, reporting communication. And this was an area where AI has been used for a long time already. So companies like Nuance with their PowerScribe, they've used AI to automatically transcribe voice into text so that radiologists can report without needing a separate team of typists. So you remove that need for that resource. And also, you can kind of free up the radiologist to concentrate on what they're doing rather than having to look at a different screen type and and do the kind of context switching and task switching that reduces efficiency. So that's already had benefits, but where I think this kind of technology has the most value and the kind of most promise is in this idea of synoptic reporting, where you can link a radiological findings in their report to specific image features. So, and what you're doing here with systems like that is you're building these massive repositories of annotated data, which is exactly what's needed for AI. So rather than having a PACS system with all your images, an EHR or a RIS with all your reports, and they're linked by patient name, but you don't know what bit of the report corresponds to what bit of the image, you can have them intrinsically linked at reporting time, which is great for future AI development. So just to conclude, so I agree with the second thing. AI is going to support rather than replace radiologists. I think there's huge opportunities for AI development in this field. And I think more focus on the full chain rather than just that image interpretation step is where you're going to see real value and improvements in throughput in these departments. But we do have problems. There's a huge lack of repositories of data that can be accessible for the development and validation of AI algorithms, including accessible by commercial organizations who are looking to profit off it. Because the fact of the matter is, if you actually want to get this technology used in clinics worldwide, it has to be a medical device. It has to be developed by companies, and they need access to that data. And also, there are the ongoing challenges of translating them into medical devices with the regulatory issues, reimbursement, who pays, is it something that would get, say in the US, its own CPT code to apply an AI algorithm, or is it just cost savings through implementing these kind of techniques as sort of standard work? And then just to finish, I looked at what a radiologist did. So I had a look to see if they had something for AI and deep learning. And again, I like this one. I thought this one was quite good. And especially this one. I like the idea that mathematicians think data scientists are just dogs on a keyboard. But no, with the people in the office that do it, this is really what they're doing. They're sitting at a screen of text. It's not as exciting as you want. But no, thanks everyone for listening. And any questions, let me know.